Hi, and welcome to the next edition of Medical Care's Driving Change Book Club, where we discuss the most pressing challenges facing the future of healthcare reform. So I'm Josephina Price. I'm one of the doctors currently working in the NHS, and I'm very excited to welcome one of the global healthcare leaders of reform, Professor Mark Britnell. So today we'll be discussing his book, The Shortage of Healthcare Workers, the Global Workforce Crisis, a shortage of good ideas or a shortage of workers. So welcome, Professor Mark Britnell.
Thanks, Josie. Good to be here.
Can I ask you what your roles were?
Yeah, well, I've been working in healthcare for 36 years. It's my passion and my profession and my purpose. I started on the NHS Management Training Scheme and then did a number of operational jobs in London before becoming Chief Executive at the University Hospitals in Birmingham at the tender age of 34. I spent 8 years in Birmingham and then became the Chief Exec of the region from Oxford to the Isle of Wight, and then was promoted to be Director General of the NHS. Then, sadly, at 42, got prostate cancer. I'm alive. And decided to travel the world and joined KPMG as the global chairman of their healthcare practice, where I worked in 81 countries on about 450 occasions, not that I was counting. Towards the end of my KPMG stint, became vice chair of KPMG UK, and then basically 3 years ago semi-retired and now have 7 or 8 jobs across the world.
One of those including being an author.
Yeah, and I'll come on to that. It's a strange story I have to tell later on, but I'm a professor at UCL of Global Health Systems, a professor at the University of Toronto in Global Health Policy. I sit on the board of the King's Fund, which is the oldest and largest health think tank charity in the world. And I chair Health Innovation Manchester. I come from the north. I've just recently finished a stint as being on the board of a health AI company in Sydney, Australia. And I also do work in Canada, where I'm helping build a 4-year medical school dedicated for GPs in British Columbia. Helped BC with their 10-year cancer plan, and also helped the Pan-Canadian Society of Cancer Experts develop their first ever workforce strategy across Canada. And then with whatever time's left over, I advise one of the largest healthcare groups in the Middle East. So healthcare's wonderful. When I first joined in 1989, a professor of gynecology said to me that all of life and death is in healthcare, and he wasn't wrong. From the porter to the professor, from the patient to the politician, all of life is in healthcare, as you're discovering now as a doctor in training.
Okay, so working and having experience in over 80 different countries and implementing global healthcare policy, why did you turn to writing books? What was the purpose?
Well, I never really thought I'd be a writer, that's for sure. I grew up in a very poor working class background. I've said before that in our house we only had 3 books. The Bible, It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet by James Herriot, and the FA Cup manual of 1972. So there was no culture in my household, all my friends of reading and writing. I can read and write, but about 5 or 6 years into my global career with KPMG, my mentor, and he has been for nearly 30 years, is a guy called Lord Nigel Crisp, who used to be the Chief Executive of the NHS, obviously now a cross-bench member of the House of Lords. He's written 2 or 3 very good books, and one day, because I used to travel 3 weeks out of 4 for 13 years, and one day I met him in London, and he said to me, you may not have come from a privileged background, but your life is now privileged. And it is. I was flying the world, meeting the best healthcare leaders and clinicians the world has got to offer. And he said, you need to share your knowledge and your learning. And I thought about it and instantaneously said, I haven't got time to write a book, which was actually code for, I don't think I can write a book. And he said, you should think about it. And of course, when I flew to these countries, the team that would keep me flying globally would give me briefings in 5 different sections that I'd have to read on the plane. And the 5 sections that seared into my mind would be a section on the politics of the country, a section on the economics of the country, a section on the national or regional health policies of the country, briefings on the organisations I was going to meet or we were working for, and then verbal briefings on the characters we would meet for obvious reasons. And so, unwittingly, I built a tremendous library of knowledge about these countries, but also, I think uniquely, I was practically working in those countries with real-time problems that that country or region or health system or health organisation had. And because I love healthcare, it was and it is easy for me to remember what was said and what was meant. And so I approached KPMG and said, look, I'd like to write a book. And they were very supportive, as long as I did it on top of the 70 hours I was working a week. And so basically, I started to write on trains, planes and automobiles. And it became compulsive, infectious even. And I discovered the sheer joy of writing and of thinking. And of course, I was able, and KPMG kindly allowed it, that all my royalties go to Prostate Cancer UK. I was on the board of that charity as well after my radical prostatectomy. So I felt I was, I suppose, writing for a higher purpose as well. And simply what I would do, I'm going to South Korea in a few days' time. And let's say I was in South Korea or in Japan, and I would always have a 7-hour rule. So I would never fly back home and see my children if it was more than a 7-hour flight. So you do Brazil and Argentina together, Australia and New Zealand, Japan and South Korea, China and Hong Kong, and so on and so forth. And I remember the first chapter I did was Japan, and that's about a 14-hour flight back from Tokyo. And of course you want to sleep, but I decided that I would start tapping away. And so I would always do a below par first draft and get home usually on a Friday before flying again on the Sunday. And on the Sunday before I flew, I would make sure I tried to finish that chapter off. I had some good people that helped research it with me. That the books are very well researched, the evidence base is strong. But I got going, and what I tended to do was share the final draft chapter with each country, with people I trusted in those countries. And it was really pleasing for them
to see a true representation.
Yeah, it was really amazing feedback, because they would say, how have you managed to get the genesis of our country's health systems, its trials and tribulations,
in 2-3 pages,
in 6 pages? And of course, I always knew I was writing the book for basically who were time poor doctors, healthcare leaders, who basically knew and understood arguments, but wanted to get to the quick of it as quickly as possible. And so, yeah, each chapter rather, can be read in the time that it takes to drink a cup of coffee. And I'm really pleased that you've read my books, because you're a demographic I didn't know would take to these books so well. But an interesting fun fact that we found out from our publishers is that doctors who were going for consultant jobs around the world would read my books in order to become instant global healthcare policy experts. And that tickles me pink.
An unintended textbook.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice, as we were being introduced, that you said you'd read the books. And to be honest with you, that fills me with a great deal of pride that the next generation of spirited, gifted clinicians will read something that I've scribbled down. If I could tell you one story, and then I'm sure you'll want to move on with other questions. When I was working in Russia after the publication of my first book, in 2015. Wow, a decade ago.
And this was the ideal global
Yeah, in
healthcare
search of the
system.
perfect health system. Still searching, by the way. But I met a Russian professor of surgery, and we were having dinner with lots of other different people in Moscow. And she said to me, Mark, you must be very proud. She said, writing a book is like giving birth to a child. And of course, I have 2 children, so I said, no, I think giving birth is a bit more difficult than writing a book. And she said, for sure it is. But she said, think about it this way. The book comes from deep inside you. The pain of writing a book is often twice as long as pregnancy. And then the pain of birth and publication have similarities. And she said, most of all, and this is stuck with me, she said, most of all, when women give birth to their children, they're always attached to them no matter what. And she said, you will feel exactly the same about your books. And guess what? She was absolutely right. And then we drank vodka.
You feel particularly bonded to the ideas and the kind of evidence bases that you put forward.
I feel curious about ideas.
If I can ask you about your senior positions that you've held in the NHS, how did working in the NHS inform your ideas about healthcare policy and specifically what you wrote in the most recent book?
Well, I think it's a pretty well-known fact that most healthcare managers don't tend to write that much. They may have their board papers written for them. You may get some policy experts in the Department of Health or elsewhere that write and are trained to write well on policy ideas. But pragmatic, practical managers and chief executives of hospitals, primary care organisations, don't have time to write. And I think that's a shame. And I was always irritated by people who work, say, in the Department of Health that used to binary separate thinkers from doers. They said, well, we're the creme de la creme, we think, and these people that run hospitals, you know, very large organisations that look after and care for thousands of staff and hundreds of thousands of patients, they simply do. And I always bridled against that. I thought, well, that's not true. I can walk and chew gum at the same time. And so I started to write for the Health Service Journal. Really nice editor called Alistair McClellan, still there now after 23 years, asked me to write a weekly piece. And sure, I was busy again then, but I used to look forward to writing my piece. I felt it was cathartic. I hoped that it would be illuminating. And I was always clear, and to answer your question, that it was poignant because I was working at the coalface. So it wasn't work as imagined, it was work as done. And of course, because very few people get the privilege to run a hospital and then a region and then a country and then fly globally to work in the public sector and the private sector, to obviously be successful in the NHS, be a successful civil servant, successful in the private sector, and now hopefully a successful professor and an author. That's not many people start out trying to chart their career like that, and you can be pretty sure I didn't either. It's just wonderful serendipity. And what I really love now about younger doctors in training like you, looking at your own career background where you've been a lawyer and now you're a medic, I see so many medics now on the MBA courses that I teach at UCL in Toronto. And I think it's an absolute joy. When I was training, back in 1989, there were very rigid demarcations about how you would get on in your life as a doctor or a nurse.
A lot of different
or a manager.
silos stopping you from moving over into the next
They
industry.
were almost impenetrable. And now there is much greater agility and fluidity and flexibility. And I rejoice in that.
So, Mark, you've also had great experience globally and dealing specifically with innovative healthcare policies. If you could recommend one healthcare policy that you would use to structurally change the NHS right now, tomorrow, what would it be and how would you do it?
Wow, that's a very good question. Most people ask me if I had to choose one country in the world with the best healthcare system, what would it be? But you've asked a different question. That's a really good question. I would say the population health management system of the Israel health maintenance organisations, particularly Khalid, where you would have every evening between 24 and 36 clinical sentinel indicators that would be sent into the cloud. Their clinicians have worked on their own population health AI algorithms. And so because all of their information is connected, primary care, pharmacy, hospital care, this data gets sent to the cloud every evening. The algorithms were away. We know there are 6 long-term conditions that drive 70% of acute costs in hospitals. And what the algorithms do, which have been clinically developed through clinical consensus by clinicians, they spit out alerts overnight to tablets that are held by community nurses and healthcare practitioners. And those nurses and community healthcare practitioners go and see patients almost before they get ill. And if the holy grail of healthcare is to be wise before the event and not clever after the event, Israel and some other systems, perhaps in Singapore and some other countries, are on the cusp of anticipatory healthcare, which, as we know, if you think about our own country now and the three shifts, or the triple jump as I call it, the hop, skip and the jump, everyone will need population health to be more meaningful if health systems are to remain or become sustainable for the next 50 years. So there are lots of other great things I've seen all around the world. I mean, that, as you know, the great thing about working in healthcare is that health professionals are the highest qualified human beings on the planet. And so to work in that cauldron of intellectual fervour is simply magnificent. As I arrived here today at the Royal College of Physicians, all 500 years of its history, I marvelled at the paintings. Of course, Too Many Men. Fortunately now, you have now a new female leading the Royal College of Physicians. But that history and that heritage of serving and curiosity and using evidence in a new age of enlightenment is something that the medical profession should always be proud of driving forwards. And I'm happy to be here today talking with you about that.
Specifically, I think one of the things you can marvel at, even though you've had such experience over the world, is the kind of history of the NHS, specifically with the Bevanite report, and how we use evidence-based medicine, productivity and efficiency, which you reference yourself, to really fund and drive the changes in our healthcare system. But specifically, you reference the global workforce shortage in this book, almost 80 million by 2030. How would you recommend that our workforce service closes up that gap by 2030?
That's a great question. So after my first book in 2015, In Search of the Perfect Health System, it nearly killed me writing that book. And we might talk later on. I've looked at some of the other people you've interviewed about the loneliness of writing and the insecurities of being a writer, which I hope we can come back to later on. But I vowed I would never write another book again because I was doing a full-time global job. You know, I was flying 3 weeks out of 4 every month. It's a stressful job. It's a global job. Big teams to manage across the world. Very demanding clients because they paid you some money. They want answers. But by about 2017, 2 years after the first book, I started to realise that no matter where I went, rich or poor, north or south, east or west, whichever country or health care organisation I was working in, they didn't have enough staff. So once you start to realise that, it becomes like a scratch you want to itch. So wherever I was and whatever job I was doing, I would say to the people who we were working with, oh, by the way, what's your workforce situation like? And wherever I went, to a woman and a man, they said it's really tricky. So then I looked at the World Health Organization projections, and the Dublin Declaration in 2016 said the world will be short of 18 million healthcare workers. That's now since been revised down to 10 million, although the timescale hasn't changed by 2030. So we're still
on that trajectory.
Yeah, we're still too slow. But so I thought, well, wow, I've been in healthcare all my life. I didn't know we were going to be 18 million healthcare workers short. And then I realised something. The reason why people in the United Kingdom or Germany or Spain or America or Australia or India didn't really talk about the global workforce crisis is because the WHO were largely talking about low to middle income countries. So, of course, the developed world was benefiting by moving healthcare workers from the poorer south or the poorer east into the richer west or the richer north. So I thought, I got my global team to research how many books and articles were dedicated to healthcare and the workforce, and there were thousands of them. But, and I'm sure you've seen this elsewhere, they were very long on analysis, but very short on solutions. And because, in essence, I'm a healthcare manager, healthcare leader, I wanted to show that somewhere around the world, there were solutions to these problems. And so essentially, the second book, which sold fantastically well, All Royalties to Prostate Cancer UK, is divided into 10 country chapters that cover about 80% of the world's GDP, and then 10 solution chapters where I have seen solutions work at scale in different parts of the world. And my argument was quite simple. Whether we're 18 million healthcare workers short or 10 million healthcare workers short, we can actually close that gap by thinking in a more imaginative way about the healthcare workforce, but also making it work more productively. Now, I should stress that working more productively is not the same as working more efficiently. Working more efficiently means that you drive down the unit cost of that unit. Productivity means that you get more units out of that same cost, if I can put it that way. So it's doing more for the same, whereas efficiency is doing the same for less. And so my own view, and the book builds up these 10 solution chapters, is that at 18 million healthcare workers short, that represents globally about 20% of the total capacity to care. And because I think we need the WHO reckon we need about 85 million healthcare workers also. And my argument is we can close that productivity gap if we think and plan much more flexibly and with a much more imaginative grasp of all the assets at our disposal.
So thinking about your ideas and experience specifically as a patient in the NHS, Mark, how do you think that influenced yourself as a writer and working on future healthcare policy?
Well, that's a good question. Well, look, lots of cleverer people than me have written healthcare books, and I'm always moved by doctors who write books as patients, because I've never met a doctor or a healthcare professional that doesn't see healthcare differently once they've been a patient. Once they're lying in bed and staring up at those cracked, chipped, painted ceilings, it has a profound effect on people. So I think not only, obviously, did I gift my royalties to Prostate Cancer UK after I had my radical prostatectomy, I also, in both books, use a chapter to talk about patient power and patient engagement. In terms of my own experience, I was a guinea pig. I had a radical prostatectomy, 6.5 hours in the operating theatre, and I agreed with my surgeon that he should try and do me as a day case. So I left the same day as coming in. Now, that was a very brave decision, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everybody. I think we agreed mutually because I was 42, 43 when I had the operations. I was fit otherwise. But the reason I mention that is because I was operated in an NHS hospital that was at the cutting edge of 21st century medicine. And then I was discharged into a community service which had no rhyme or reason. And so there was no care coordination. I was left to fend for myself, left to try and find the community care team, inform the general practitioner. And the point I want to make there is we all know that our NHS can be fragmented, can be disjointed. And certainly now this government, with its 3 shifts, is hopefully, with the NHS plan, going to address some of these issues. But there is nothing like feeling vulnerable and attached to a catheter and bedridden to make you realise how utterly powerless you are as a human being after a cancer operation. Now, of course, it's always bittersweet because you feel the surgery has gone well, you hope that the cancer has gone. You can never be absolutely sure, as you know. But then being left to arrange your own care after that, it wouldn't have been so bad if that had been made very clear about what the care pathway was going to be. And so we know from global research that there are 4 levels of patient empowerment. The least empowered, where the patient sees the doctor as a god, and the highest level, level 4, where the patient sees the doctor as a guide. And actually, when you look at the difference between those 4 levels, ironically, the consumption of healthcare reduces by between 16 and 20% the more empowered and informed patients are. And of course, if you think about that, just as a normal human beings don't seek to always demand the attention of doctors and nurses. They have lives they want to get on with. And empowering the patient has to be one way in which there can be a better power relationship between professionals and patients. But also, every country, as I said before, needs patients and populations to take greater responsibility for their own healthcare, both proactively and during treatment as well, obviously with the rise of long-term conditions. And of course, nowadays, whatever age you are in healthcare, and I spend a lot of time trying to remain current and contemporary, if you don't understand AI, if you don't understand digital possibilities, I don't think you're going to be that great a practitioner in the next decade or so. There's a great quote from the American Medical Association that says AI won't replace doctors, but doctors who use AI will replace doctors who don't. And I firmly believe that to be the case.
Going on that same line of thought, in the same way that you've worked across the globe with different healthcare providers, could you recommend how we harness and utilise AI to work with doctors rather than attempting to replace our workforce?
Yeah, well, first of all, I wouldn't fall into the trap of saying it's all or nothing. Too many of the scare stories that I read about the medical profession and AI is that people whip up the argument that AI will replace doctors. Look, we already have a global shortage of physicians and medics across the world. The question is not who will win that battle. Humans will prevail, but humans have to use artificial intelligence to assist them in their work. And right now, the best example that I can see in the world, and I was lucky enough to be in India last year working with the Apollo Hospital Group, who are very technologically savvy. The idea of ambient AI, voice recognized AI, they're already now using ambient AI in their consultation rooms, By the way, we're doing it now in parts of the United Kingdom as well. 3 weeks ago, I was in California. They're doing it there at Kaiser Permanente. And essentially, ambient AI will listen to a consultation between a patient and a doctor, and then it will summarize all of that into a note. It will code it, and you will have much better communication between the doctor and the patient, and also across the hospital itself, because it can organise tests and results and so on and so forth. Apollo were already saying, and Kaiser Permanente was saying the same thing to me in a different country, in the United States of America. It's already saving about 20% of a doctor's time. Now, my own personal view is, within the next 2 or 3 years, those leading systems will be saving 30% of a doctor's time. That's either more time for the patient and more quality, and or more productivity in terms of patients seen. So, and there are many others now. The Australian health AI company I work with, Beamtree, is now using a system called Trickle Down, which looks at the vital signs of patients and can predict when they're going to go off in bed. It can reduce length of stay in ITU or possibly even avoid it. So the idea now of the intelligent hospital, the intelligent health system, and the intelligent healthcare practitioner should be something we all celebrate, because I think in healthcare, AI will come in peace. It won't try and replace hard-pressed clinicians, because we're 18 million short. So, yeah, I don't think it's a question of AI will replace. I do, however, agree with I think the gentle premise in your question, which is how well is it integrated? And it's not particularly well integrated. There are a couple of solutions with that, or for that. Let clinicians play with it safely to begin with, so they feel they own it and they control it, and not vice versa. And secondly, you have to demystify care processes so people can see skills and tasks in a different way, and then intelligently understand how technology should be employed. In my work, obviously, with KPMG, and towards the end, I was in charge of healthcare, government and infrastructure globally. Lots of other industries are implementing AI at a much greater rate by demystifying their business processes and looking at skills and tasks, and then adjusting human job descriptions with what technology can do. All too often in healthcare, and you look at the history of technology being introduced in health systems, it bounces off clinical practice. It bounces off silos of practice. It bounces off hard-nosed demarcations between professions. And we have to chill out a bit and be a bit more flexible, I think.
Make an absolutely fantastic point about using AI exactly in the gaps where we're finding workflow and productivity not really working for the NHS. So in my own experience, I'm currently rotating in A&E. We're using an AI system that helps the charge nurse utilise patient flow and see gaps of where the most appropriate beds are for the most number of doctors for the patients that need it the most, for example, resus or in majors. And I think this reduces the stress significantly on doctors that are trying to manage bed space and time and the resource, especially of under-resourced doctors.
That's cool.
So,
and how do the nurses, do they like it?
Yeah, it's finding to be very useful for my A&E service, and flow is improving. So as you spoke,
that's cool.
Productivity in the NHS breeds a much kinder environment of utilising people's free time more towards the patient or more towards their own break time for the benefit of themselves.
That's cool.
So how could we utilise future healthcare policy and AI, keep going along with this thought, on improving our healthcare service to support healthcare workers? So Mark really cleverly mentions in his book, if you improve your healthcare service, you improve the well-being of society. That's a line I really liked.
Yeah.
How can we improve and support life for NHS workers?
Well, there is obviously a global truism. There can be no healthcare without the workforce. My book was written in 2019, Human, Solving the Global Workforce Crisis in Healthcare, before COVID and before the advent of large-scale AI adoption. I was able to understand these trends because I've seen them at work around the world. I think, first of all, there are three things that you need to do, at least three things. First of all, you have to let curious clinicians experiment safely with new technologies and that costs time and money. But any health system that doesn't allow for that is cutting off its nose to spite its face, because it's an investment in the future. Secondly, you have to take the fear from human beings by training them into digital techniques and processes. If you look at the Royal Colleges or even other training schemes, honestly, how much digital exposure do medical students or trainees really get? I mean, it's a fraction, isn't it, compared to what they are now expected to do. And thirdly, I think it's this issue about understanding that government can't do it all by itself. I mean, no government now in the world, not even the Chinese government, really controls AI. Now, I'm not going to go into Black Mirror territory today, but understanding and having long-term partnerships between the public sector, the private sector and the voluntary sector has to be a given in 21st century medicine. And if you think, for example, of what AI is doing now, if you look at pharmaceutical research and how many years that takes to move from the bench to the bedside, and how much costs, 2-3 billion to develop drugs, AI now gives you the opportunity to speed up that process, make it cheaper, and therefore potentially its benefit far more ubiquitous in the future. So I think in terms of your question, we haven't really got to grips yet with digital, let alone AI. But there are countries such as in Australia, they have the Australian Health Digital Agency. And so they've created something now where one of its core purposes is to train clinicians in being agile and adept at using new technologies and new digital sources. So it's happening in places. I think also there's a theory in academia on innovation. It's called the quadruple helix, and that's a fancy title for basically 4 parts of society working together: healthcare, the academic sector, the industrial sector, and civil society. And basically countries that have mature and well-developed quadruple helix thinking and working. Partnerships.
Strong partnerships.
Get on quicker. Now, I'm hopeful, because I'm proudly British, that we have many of those core components. We have a decent health care service. We have a strong life science service. We have a strong academic service. We have decent civil society. We should and could be doing better.
In terms of retaining our current workforce to prevent that number increasing of who we need by 2030, how do we help appreciate and take care of our workforce?
This is the number one issue at the moment. When people think about recruiting your way out of a workforce crisis, there's a great cliche or truism, which I believe in. You can't recruit your way out of a retention crisis. So one of my chapters in the book is called Joy at Work. I was criticised for using that title because people thought that title was so far away from people's worked and lived experience. It was fantastical. But I think people do find joy at work. I think you find joy at work. I find joy at work. But I think at its heart, during my global research, when you ask people individually as healthcare practitioners, what percentage of your colleagues, including you, have a meaningful appraisal with meaningful consequences, it's less than 30% worldwide. It's less than 20% in the NHS. Some say it's less than 10%. And so the sad fact of the matter is, if you don't invest time in understanding the hopes, fears and desires of the people that work in healthcare and constructing training and development around them and giving them direction so they can find purpose and meaning, then don't be surprised that those people don't give you discretionary effort. And I'm afraid to say we've lost our way in the NHS on that matter. And of course, sitting here at the RCP, I'm well aware of some of the venomous and vicious debates that have taken place recently over different and new forms of healthcare worker. I think the only way you can truly motivate staff, when you look at staff, healthcare staff around the world, there are always three things that motivate them. Do you want to know what they are? You know what they are already. Working in teams, working to the top of your professional practice, and being respected for the work that you do. And then number 4 usually is money, and then number 5 is flexible working lives. And you can go to most countries in the world, and those 5 will play out in different orders. How many organisations, if you accept those 5 things, systematically hold themselves to account for improvements on those 5 parameters? And Josie, it's not a rhetorical question. The answer is very few, sadly.
I definitely think private companies that focus on graduate recruitment and a whole graduate system of taking care of your workers could be a guiding light for how that could work in the NHS. I'm currently a junior doctor in the foundation training programme, so my learning and my progression is very systematically and rigidly recorded with my supervisors. However, I feel like doctors, as they progress towards consultancy, feel that guiding hand less and less.
Yeah. You know, the professor I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation today, he also said another thing which was interesting. He said, the problem with the NHS is we appoint consultants and then watch them get bitter over 30 years. And if you think about any other industry, why would you allow your most intelligent, most creative, highest value human beings wither and effectively wither through neglect? And so this, the rights and responsibilities of the employer and the employee are badly understood in healthcare per se, but also, I think, especially sadly in the NHS. I've got many cliches or truisms in both my books, but one of them is change is a human contact sport. If you want to change, you better contact human beings. How often don't we do that when we're trying to change in the NHS?
As a final question to yourself, it seems like you have quite a few generative ideas, Mark, and your work is not slowing down anytime soon. Would you be interested in writing another book?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, I'm not dead yet. I'm still alive and well. I am interested in writing another book, and I'm currently thinking about 2 different ideas. I doubt I'll write both books simultaneously. But I've recently become chair of Health Innovation Manchester for the NHS. And the chief executive there is a former cardiac surgeon called Ben Bridgewater. And we are thinking of writing a practical guide to health innovation across the world and in the NHS. So Ben is a good writer, he's been a great researcher, great surgeon, and now is a great leader. And he's keen to write that with me. And we already know that innovation is 90% perspiration and 10% inspiration, not the other way around. So I think we might be writing about how you actually make this real and tangible for healthcare practitioners and patients and consumers. The second thing I'm thinking of doing, perhaps I could do it simultaneously, is I've now obviously taught hundreds of MBA students at UCL, and UCL draws students from all across Asia, from Oceania, from the Middle East, from Europe, from Africa, and from the United Kingdom. But I'm also a professor at the University of Toronto that draws from North America, the United States and Canada. And what I'm thinking of doing is rewriting In Search of the Perfect Health System,
Post-COVID and
post-COVID. But then the trick would be this time is that I've had the pleasure of writing 2 books already, but I would pair up students, say, from America and China, say, from Japan and Brazil, Australia and Norway, and I would get them to write a chapter on one of their countries. So I would force global learning, I would encourage global discourse, I would still have my name on the book, but they would get their names on each chapter. And so I am thinking about whether I do that. I'm still kind of busy at the moment, but both books have an appeal to me. And whoever is listening today, you can let me know in due course.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Mark Britnell, for your time, and thank you for joining us on this edition's Medical Care Driving Change Book Club.